funny story about that. I'll tell you.
Welcome to the December 1st, 2022 Planning Board regular meeting here in Sunset Beach Town Hall Council Chambers. Seeing we have a quorum, I request that we all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Meeting's in order. Pledge of
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen. Thank you. A statement we read at the start of each planning board meeting. Does any member of the planning board have a conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest with regard to any item on the agenda? If so, please state so at this time.
Richard Dysinger, no.
Pete Larkin, no.
I do not. Jerry Burns does not.
Sybil Kesterson, I do not.
Okay, it's unanimous. We have an agenda in front of us. It's a pretty straightforward one today. Does anybody have any amendments to this draft agenda? Richard?
No.
Okay.
No.
Jerry?
No.
Sybil?
No.
I do not. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the draft agenda as submitted.
I so move.
Second.
Second received by Richard. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The agenda is approved. Going to number 3, we have public comments on agenda items only. Seeing we do have an audience today, does anybody wish to make any comment to the planning board? Seeing none, we'll move on to consideration of approval of 2 of our minutes, November 3rd and November 17th, 2 different planning board meetings. I had no objections to the November 3rd
I don't need
minutes.
I-
Sybil? Jerry?
This is the UDO audit.
This is the November 3rd
No,
meeting.
November 3rd. No,
I think
do
you're
not.
looking at the 17th. November 3rd?
I think Lisa did a great job of capturing the comments. I guess the only thing, and I will accept it, is the general reluctance that the planning board had in terms of the Jaguars lair, but Grady Richardson did a great job in outlining the UDO constraints that we were in. So, but I think I would
Do you
vote
want to
to
add or
approve the
delete anything, change
No.
anything?
No.
Okay.
I do not.
I do not.
I'd like to entertain a motion that we approve the November 3rd regular meeting minutes of the planning board. Can I have a
I so
motion?
move.
Can we have a second, please?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
November 3rd minutes are approved. The draft minutes are approved as submitted. November 17th minutes, I had a couple of comments on it. It was a special meeting where we were reviewing the UDO, so it's pretty complicated, or at least it's complex. Under section on the first page, which is packet page P7, or page 7, under Article 3, Section 3.1, the second line down that's in red, it says automotive major, and above it was automotive minor. I believe what we did is we combined automotive minor and major into just automotive.
Yep.
And so I'd like the record to state that.
And to the degree that we can, it will be packaged in with maritime sales rentals, similar, is what we discussed, if I recall.
Right.
I do.
Did you want to make
Yeah,
a
I
comment
had one
about
question on that. The on the major automotive major, there was a 5,000 square foot building minimum for that. That should be revisited. I don't want to take time here to discuss it now, but 5,000 square feet for automotive is quite extensive.
I think that there was one of the members, Mr. LeBruno, wanted to put a threshold on it. There wasn't one at present, and then we discussed
Yeah.
various iterations, and then just determined that we'll just allow any sort of automotive
We do.
in
Yeah.
MB
So we didn't-
MB1, regardless
we
of
didn't
size.
put a 5,000 square
That's-
foot
that-
minimum on it.
Okay,
That-
that's
that's
right.
right.
We were talking about that and weren't sure what we had deliberated on.
Sure.
Okay,
But
that's
thank
fine.
you.
And we can,
For clarifying
once
that.
once there's been a
Okay.
revised draft, we can talk about it further again.
When we talked about community centers, I see it's private is stricken here also under table 3.1, and public is, which would be a new word, is added in red. I didn't see that. I thought we just talked about community centers. I didn't realize that we were differentiating public and private.
pardon, which item?
This is all still on the first page under section 3.1. Again, the minutes of the 17th of November meeting.
Okay. Yes, I thought that we were just getting rid of that it wouldn't be differentiated one way or the other.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I recalled.
Does anybody else on the planning board have any consternation with that? I know it was, I'm not sure that we were as specific as we probably should have been, but that was my thought. And here it was striking private and only having public. And I didn't think that was really our
Intent.
goal.
That's right.
I had no other comments. I thought that the minutes were very well done,
Yes.
as Katie always does.
Mr. Chair, so just to be certain on this, we are going to strike the word nature. We're going to strike the word public. So if
Y'all are okay with that, then you can accept these as amended, and they'll go ahead and be accepted today.
Sorry. Going back, and I wanted to double check. We do have it as public because now we're identifying two different types of community centers rather than just one. And so I do have in my notes here, community centers public followed by community centers private. And there'll be two uses and they'll be differentiated separately.
So there will be two different.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So that would also mean that we don't want to strike private then here.
That's correct.
Okay. Does that make sense, Katie? That we want to not strike private,
Okay,
but
so
that we want to keep public.
okay,
So just get rid of the stricken private and then you're fine.
Okay. Just unstrike private. Well,
Yep, just delete it.
delete it.
Yeah.
Does the board understand that? I
Yeah.
do now. But I
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for bringing that up.
striking major, unstriking private, leaving public.
Correct.
Okay, I got it. So you
Now-
can accept these as amended.
Chad, can we vote to accept them as amended? The amendment is pretty straightforward and simple.
Yeah.
I'd like to entertain a motion that we accept the
so
minutes
move.
as amended for the 17th of November.
I second.
Okay, it's all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, Katie, thank you very much. All right, we finished with the minutes under 4. We now go into new business, consideration of UDO text amendment for conditional zoning. Chad, can you open up the discussions on this,
Sure.
please?
Sure. Before you is a text amendment for conditional rezoning. Conversations with the attorney since and Wes for a couple weeks now. We thought it would be forward and appropriate to move forward with instead of waiting a year, maybe year and a half, somewhere in that timeline. It'd be a good tool to go ahead and interject into our current UDO.
Are you on the microphone?
It's a little muffled. Let's see if that helps.
I mean, I could hear you, but I didn't know if the speaker was picking up.
Alan, is that better?
Yeah.
All right. So we thought instead of waiting till the end of next year, beginning of the following 23, 24, we'd go ahead and work this language into the current UDO. I've worked with Wes McLeod to come up with this text amendment in draft form, and I will turn it over to him as he's facilitating this. Since we already went through the audit, the draft language was done, and Mr. McLeod has worked hard on getting this ready for us.
Can I make a comment before Wes
Sure.
inserts? Because obviously he's going to drive this bus.
Sure.
For the edification of people watching on YouTube and the rest of the board, I think it's obvious to us that we dove into this topic at our 8/10/2022 planning board meeting, special meeting, in detail. We spent quite a bit of time on this because it was all brand new in terminology and focus. And we formatted it into the new Article 2.16, if people are reading on the in the new book, if you will.
And that's the new UDO.
That's the new UDO that we're in the process of birthing here. All right, Wes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone for having me today. Yes, you all or at least familiar with this term now, conditional zoning, as we discussed it several months ago. I have provided we provided a staff report to you that provides some general overview. Certainly, we have gone through this to some degree, assuming that this is moved on to council today or next month. There will be a further education that will have to occur with them, and perfectly fine to help explain this topic, which is somewhat nebulous, if you will. It is a new tool that, assuming again that this would be implemented now or in the future, that the town would have in its tool belt to allow legislatively approved rezonings that are site specific. And so,
Could I get a definition of quote unquote legislatively approved in this context?
legislatively approved means it is approved by the town council. So any rezonings approved by the town council after a referral to the planning board, and when it is a legislative decision versus a quasi-judicial decision, the public can participate. Folks can call you guys. There's no strict rules on conflict of interest, for example, from ex parte communication. You don't have to get into this formal hearing process. So it's a much more effective way to engage the public. There's strict limitations on who can participate. For example, in a quasi-judicial decision, you have to have technically legal standing to provide testimony that can be taken into consideration. In this particular item, if I wanted to show up from Wilmington and tell the council why I thought that a proposal was a good or bad idea, the council could listen to what I had to say.
As we sit here right now, the ability for an applicant to go through this process would be limited, I believe, to the Board of Adjustment. And in that case, citizens that don't have standing would not be allowed to participate, comment, communicate their opinions. But in this new idea that we're bringing forward, they would.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Before the planning board.
Before the planning board and the town council, and even before either of those, there'd be a community meeting in which the applicant would engage the public and share their ideas as a precursor, which also can be
So,
very
for
helpful.
instance, they could sponsor a meeting at the Pink Palace in Sea Trail.
Absolutely.
They could, right, okay.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a term that has a lot of important meanings in terms of making this a more transparent process, which I think is really crucial to its success.
Yes, absolutely. And so ultimately, the final approval comes from town council, and so
But it starts with us.
it
planning
starts
board.
starts with you guys, in which you guys can recommend approval of a project. You can recommend denial of a project. I don't know why this keeps cutting out. Or you can recommend approval of a project subject to certain conditions that need to be attached to the plan. And ultimately, when that plan is approved, assuming a plan is to be approved, the only thing that can be built on that site is what is approved. And so that's very different than a general base district rezoning, where say you went from an MR3 to an MB1, you can do anything in the MB1. But in this particular scenario, you guys would know fully what it is that can be built there, and that's the only thing that can
And
be
it cannot change downstream.
built.
If
Except
an
through
applicant
a
then sells it to somebody else, they can't all of a sudden put another
Put a tattoo parlor in there.
type of business there.
that's correct. Not
Even
a,
though that type of business might be approved in our ordinances.
That's correct, because you're creating a new entity every time. You're creating a brand new zoning district, and the only thing that's allowed in there is what you guys approve on that site
So
plan.
it's independent of any subsidiary regulations, or we would fashion those in the conditional rezoning.
That's right. And so there may be a range of uses that the applicant requests. Say they may say we want these 5 uses, or it's only 1 use, but it's whatever it is that is approved, based on the wisdom of the planning board and the town council and in any sort of staff technical review.
And do you mind us interrupting you? Because
No,
I think
go ahead.
this is
Yeah.
beneficial. Let's say that an applicant comes in with 5 uses for an area that is of a certain size.
Mhm.
Can we say yes to 3 of them and no to 2 of them?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
So, and they don't have to resubmit.
That-
it's a flowing
Mhm.
application at that point that can be adjusted by conditions that are mutually agreed on.
That's right. And even when it gets to the point where they may be considering approval at town council, there will be some potential back and forth negotiation on finalizing conditions.
Okay.
You know, the applicant,
Just
remember,
like now.
just like
If we
that.
approve an amendment, they can modify it.
That's right. And remember that the applicant does have to agree to those conditions. So you guys, you have to keep that in mind. You can't necessarily say we want all these things. They have to be agreed upon, and they have to be signed off in writing that they're agreeing to do them. And so the thought being, of course, is that there's some obvious give and take there to help achieve what it is that's most meaningful for both the applicant and the local government. If that makes sense.
Yeah, which is what we want.
What I search for is why didn't we have this already? It seemed to me to make sense. Now there's some things in this document that was before us now that I think there's other things that need to be added to it that we need to be considered. But I think as Richard just said, we still have that opportunity to apply those conditions to a specific application.
Yep.
So it's because there's things like saving trees and minimum sizes and setbacks and all kinds of things that I guess can be negotiated during that process.
That's correct. That's correct. Yep.
Go ahead. You get to the point where you think you're.
And then I'll turn it back over to you,
Yes.
Mr. Chair. So I'm not going to belabor any more of the intro. I think you guys are familiar with this. I will point out that staff did have a meeting with potentially one of the benefactors of this, and there were some items that were brought forward for a potential modification. One of those being on page 6 under section B2. There is a clause requiring that any proposals in the mainland residential district consist of 25 acres of a contiguous tract.
Yeah.
And so, that was in there. That was
When we looked at it in August.
that's right. And so it remained. However, we think that it would, subject to your discretion, probably be okay to remove that. And if there's a proposal that comes forward, it's too small, then the council or you all can say as much. And
Well, my concern with that is this essentially, because I think the summary is spot on.
okay.
Then we get into the devils in the details. When that 25 acre contiguous tract says, we're basically saying we want to be able to put a mud district wherever we want.
Sort of.
That's essentially what it is. And my goal in terms of trying to get more mixed use development
Mhm.
within communities is not addressed in that.
Yep.
In other words, if a developer wants to build a small restaurant in an available tract,
Yep.
and there's many of them in many of these communities, this would prohibit
that. Yep.
So I don't know how we address that.
You can
Well,
just strike it.
He's saying, are we talking up? Let's be specific. Are we talking about just striking that sentence, starting with the word within?
25.
The two sentences at the end of B2.
Okay, I see what you have. So it's from the word within mainland residential zoning
Yep.
all the way to the end of that.
Yes, sir.
Part 2.
Mhm.
I might also suggest that in the paragraph above it, while we're on this page, that when we reviewed it back in August here before the planning board, we made a change to the last sentence in B1, Bravo 1. And what we agreed on is starting with the word development, we agreed on development standards may include, but not limited to, such things as parking, landscaping, design guidelines, and buffers.
Yes.
Thank you.
Because
Mr.
we
Chair.
don't need to be listing 40 other things that could come into play. So I wanted to say, but not limited to.
Okay.
But I'll read it again.
I got it.
You see that from our.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank
okay.
you.
Katie, does that make sense to you? Um, Also, can I go a little bit earlier in the document here? If we go to page 4,
What, have we finished with 2?
yes,
Oh,
we struck
What
the
did-
last 2 sentences in 2.
You struck them.
The last 2
I
sentences.
did not
In other words,
understand that. I thought we were talking about-
25-acre consideration.
Okay.
But I didn't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but on page 4, when we talk about the 2017 land use plan, we talk about, it starts off with 13 types of development. And just a housekeeping point, that's item number 14, not 13.
Sorry.
Page 1010,
Thank you.
which also adjusts the next one on page 5,
To be
which is 14 types of urban growth pattern desired, should be 15 and not 14.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back over to you and the board.
I'd like to read something. Mr. LeBruno is not with us today, and I just want the other members of the planning board to hear, in his words, a comment that he texted me a few minutes ago. He said, "My concerns were in the area of uses. All or not some, comma, minimum open spaces, no private roads, and consideration of tree preservation." He said also, like we discussed last meeting, how about some time fences? I hadn't read into here, I mean, I'm just reading that now, so I don't know how, I mean, a time fence really is I don't want to say statute of limitations, but it's a response time. It's a time period between preliminary and final plats and those kinds of things. And I don't know if we got into those kind of details in this conditional zoning section.
Yeah, I mean, the other phrase that,
Let's try
Yeah,
to finish with
So,
Ron's.
um,
Thank
go
you,
ahead,
Richard.
go ahead.
Sure. I think that the uses and the tree preservation and things like that,
Those can be conditions.
that's correct.
Okay.
And so I don't think you necessarily want to try to manufacture something in here.
And for everybody's edification,
yeah.
when somebody brings an application before us, we know exactly where it's going to go. We can drive out and we can look at that property. We can see what the physical situation is there.
Yep.
And we can then know real time
Yep.
what the site-specific footprint is, everything else, what it affects or doesn't affect.
Yes, that's correct. And typically, just so how these usually work, there will be staff will always recommend at a minimum that all of the development standards be complied with unless there's a recommendation for an exception to them by the applicant and or by the planning board to say we want them to be more stringent. Does that make sense? So there'll be sort of a baseline
Yes.
Right.
always,
Yes,
okay?
okay.
And that will be a standard condition. So
So if we have revised something for tree preservation in the ordinances eventually, that would be applicable to any conditional zoning application that would come before us,
that's correct.
as
And
at least the baseline.
as a baseline.
so the new UDO will set the baseline, but this gives us tools right away.
Yes, well,
Well, when it's approved.
this will work off the existing UDO, and typically staff would say, one of the conditions we recommend is that all development standards be complied with. The applicant may say, hey, we want to not have as stringent or whatever it is. We don't want to save as many trees, but
Here's what we'll do.
But we'll do this,
Okay.
or whatever it is.
Richard, I apologize, I cut you off because I wanted to stay on Ron's, but go ahead.
The timeline.
Yeah,
issue.
that was the next thing that I was going to get to. So there is a timeline for obviously moving this process through, but I think what Ron is getting at, how long is their application valid, things of this nature. So this goes back to vesting. When you approve someone for this new rezoning and site specific, basically you're saying that this project can be built on this site in perpetuity, unless either the applicant sells the property and someone else rezones it.
It doesn't transfer with the property.
That's no. It keeps it. Yeah, if you sell it, it's still allowed to be built.
Okay, so
For
it does
what?
transfer with
So
the
it does
property.
transfer with a
does
city.
transfer.
Yes, it stays with the land. It runs with the land regardless of ownership.
But the new owner is under the conditions of the
That-
old agreement.
That's correct. Now, let's say that the town decides, hey, we approved this thing. I don't know that we want this still to be out there. So if you are outside of the statutory vesting period for that, say 2 years or 7 years, depending on the size of the project, the town can initiate a process to rezone it back to its initial district. However, you can only do so if you're not infringing upon their common law vesting rights. So let's say that the site sits there vacant for 7 years, no work has been done. Then the town could rezone it to the base district on their behalf.
Yeah, but we also get into the shoving match as to what is substantial, what isn't substantial.
That's right.
Progress is.
But if the applicant has moved forward on trying to construct their project, they've had substantial expenditures and
it's forever.
That's right. And so,
But-
But that's the way it is now anyway.
yeah. So does that make sense for the timeline?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I'm happy about. I mean, we get hammered on this timeline thing, and obviously there's nothing we can do about it. But okay, but I understand the parameters. And
That's
as long
only
as
for
in
an
a
approved
transfer
project.
sale, the conditions transfer with it.
Yes.
I mean, my concern is, there are bad actors in this business, and you have to have some flexibility in terms of.
Yeah, but owners of property have rights, and it's
That's right. And
Yeah.
so if someone wants to do something that's different, remember,
Right.
than what was approved, then if it classifies as a minor modification, which is something that's very minimal. For
Right.
example, they're moving a dimension by a very, nominal amount, they're not changing any uses, then that can be done administratively. But otherwise, it's got to go back all the way through the process.
Sybil, I think
alright.
you had a point
Sorry.
too to make.
I forgot it. I got sidetracked.
Well, write it down. I do.
I know, and it was like, but wait a minute. It'll come back to me. Just give me time.
Just raise your hand.
All right. So I think we've covered the time issue. I'm not.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've satisfied. Well, I don't know if satisfied. I think we've addressed
Yes,
Ron's
addressed.
comments. Sybil,
That's it. The time issue. Go over the time issue with me, please, to make sure I understand it correctly.
So let's talk about this in two ways. Let's talk about the first way. Someone submits an application. Remember, just because they submit an application to do conditional zoning, they don't necessarily have any rights to do anything out there because nothing's been approved. Correct? They don't have any rights to do that until it's actually rezoned and approved. The only rights that they would have, for example, in that event, is the town said, hey, we're going to get rid of conditional zoning as an applicant's ability to do that. They modified the rules. They would still have the right to proceed with that conditional zoning under the terms of the application they submitted. But it's not like submitting for a by right project that's already in the ordinance and you've got a placeholder. Does that make sense
Yeah.
for that part?
Yeah.
And the second part is once they're approved, remember, you're more or less modifying the map to say, you're allowed to do this in perpetuity. And the only way, say the town wants to take that right of way from them, the town would have to initiate a rezoning for that tract. So long as they're outside of their statutory vesting or you're not infringing on their common law vesting.
Okay.
So, but the statutory vesting is 7 years.
It could be 7 years if it's what's termed a multi-phase development project. That's anything over 25 acres. And so it could be 7 years. That's
Okay.
correct.
am I correct in understanding or thinking that the only place that this cannot happen is in beach residential on the island? It can happen in BB1 on the island.
That's correct.
But it cannot happen in the residential portions of the island.
You're
no
correct.
matter what.
That's how it is written at present.
Is
Now,
there,
are there-
is
I'm
there a
sorry, go
reason? Is there a reason for that, or do we just want to be absolutely, positively? We want to assure people that we're not going to build or even think about building something other than a residential on the residential part of the island.
Mr. Chair, that's up to the town's wisdom. The reason why, I think that I would advise is that I would just be mindful that that you start receiving conditional zoning requests for a one-off residential lot, and and the slippery slope that may lead down, rather than, for example, someone submitting to do a variance or something like that. You know, I think that I've advised the same thing in other beach towns. The lots are expensive enough. Folks have the means to go through this process for a one-off lot on and say you approve one and then there's another. I could be wrong.
Does one applicant with an approval create a situation where other applicants can say, well, you let him do it?
They can,
And confuse the issue where we looked at various conditions and we looked at the site-specific considerations, and this other one is a little bit different, or we thought it was a little bit, because we could be a little arbitrary in the way we deal with this conditional zoning. Am I correct?
yes, you can be arbitrary, but remember, there's no legal precedent. But what the precedent that you're setting is the political will precedent to say, hey, you let Chad do that, so why aren't you letting me do that?
Right.
Does that make
Well,
sense?
but that's kind of life too.
But that's life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, anybody on BR1 on the island,
Mhm.
if they want to make a change, the only remedy is for them to go before the Board of Adjustment.
Well, that would be if they want to seek a variance. I mean, they could propose to rezone their property as a base district rezoning from BR1 to whatever district they wanted, but they would not be allowed to seek a conditional zoning approval under the way this is currently drafted.
So if, and I'll use a specific example so it's clear to us. Let's say the area of Riverside right now, which is developing extremely fast.
Yep.
But that's a large area with quite a few homes in it. If they decided they wanted to do something different, conditional zoning would still not be available to them.
Not as this is currently drafted. But if you guys want to, you're welcome to open it up.
No, I don't, because I'm scared
Okay.
to do that.
Okay.
Chad, you raised your hand?
Oh, I was just stretching. I was just.
All right. Okay. All right.
I think the BB1 containment is a good idea. I mean, we don't want to become Ocean Isle, and by narrowing the commercial development
Don't do
on the
that.
main island, I think preserves the unique flavor of the beach area. So
Not to represent the beach.
I love Ocean Isle. I don't want to be Coney Island. And
Yes,
they're
there
far
you go.
enough away
Yeah.
that they
Yeah.
can't, their feelings won't be hurt.
absolutely.
Please, let's not make specific references
You don't
to
want an
neighbors.
amusement park?
Living on the island, the way it's stated is perfect.
All right, any more discussion
Okay.
from
Yeah, I
from
do
planning
have.
board?
I have one issue on page 5, purpose 1. High level of certainty. I always have a problem with that phrase.
We beat that up
Yeah.
already a couple of times,
Yeah.
and it's
And in this very special consideration, I mean, when the bank asks me for a mortgage, the high level of certainty they get is I put down a deposit. So I'm curious as to whether that would impair this process or encourage more diligence in terms of its completion.
It's up. We did discuss this at length. I mean, it can be stricken. It can, it can be left.
Well,
in.
I want to see it strengthened. I mean, I think, yes, we get a lot of people together and they look very motivated to do this. That's the way businesses start. But are we opening ourselves up to, just kidding, after expending a lot of resources in terms of all the processes that are going to take place to make this happen? I mean, I don't want to keep the money. It's just it's a
I
bond.
think the one thing that you might be alluding to is that as you look at this process, you have a lot of engineering costs going into a project on the front end side of this for a developer, not on the back end.
Right.
If somebody's going to potentially spend that much money on the front end for a project, the high certainty of it actually.
So that
Coming
would
in-
come under the aegis of high level of certainty in your view.
Would you agree or disagree with me?
Yeah, I mean, the town would want to have. I mean, you can never be certain because oftentimes folks are getting their entitlements and they're finalizing their investor group and all this type of stuff before they haul off and start building. But I mean, you do not want to be a town that's approving conditional zoning all over the place and these things just sit there. Because remember, the only thing that can be built is what you've been approved, and so you're effectively locking up a piece of property in, to some degrees, perpetuity. And so that's why that language is in there.
Okay.
You can never be certain that something's going to be built, but it is ideally that you approve it and it gets built.
All right.
Chad, when somebody comes before us with conditional, wanting to use this conditional zoning route, I would assume that they would need to provide us with at least a preliminary plat. Now, or does the preliminary plat come later?
So, Wes, do you want to get into the MDP?
I'd like to see what we should expect.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's a sketch on the back of a bar napkin,
So,
that to me is not
like
real.
I alluded to. There's a lot of engineering and a lot of stuff that goes into the beginning of this project. And I'm going
But
to
it's
turn
not
it over,
complete.
well, I'm going to turn it over
plat.
to Wes. He's going to walk you through what to expect out of an MDP, which is a master development plan.
Yep.
Yes.
So what you want, what the town wants to approve is something that is clear to both the applicant and the town as to what is allowed to be built on that site. Now, if it is a residential project that's going to have a subdivision component, they are seeking their entitlements so that they can then go expend the money that's going to be necessary to do the detailed preliminary plat, which then comes back to you guys at a later date and should meet the terms of that master development plan approval.
Okay,
It
quick
will
question.
not be, you're not going to have the engineering detail. Now, some folks may submit it as a preliminary plat, and that's fine. But if you're, imagine if you're an applicant and you're not sure your project's going to be approved, you may not want to expend $100,000 on the engineering fees, right? You want to make sure that you've got your rights first, and then you come back with that. It still doesn't mean that it's going to be a napkin sketch. It needs to be very clear as to what they're
It has
allowed
to be
to
enough so that we can fully understand the scope of what the applicant wants to do.
Yep.
And if they want a variance or want to change a setback or something like that that's in our existing ordinance, I would believe the applicant should be bringing that to our attention
That's right.
up front.
That's right. It says, so that's on starts on page 6 under 5A through
Yes.
I.
Oh, okay.
And
okay.
it lists the things that
For the
need to
master
be.
development plan.
That's
yes.
right. Now,
Gotcha.
if it is a non-residential plan, basically a commercial site plan, they can come in with their conditional zoning and it meet the major site plan requirements, and they can get their conditional zoning improvement and their major site plan there in the one meeting. And that would be where you do, in fact, have the detail necessary. Or they may say, we want a little bit more generalized plan, and we'll come back to you at a later date.
And if we have questions during that presentation, initial presentation, I would think from reading this that we can apply stipulations to it. A time stipulation. When do you want to do this? Get input from the applicant, not necessarily force something on them, but say that, okay, but within a year we want to see a preliminary plat. Am I going off base here?
That, I would potentially, you could ask that. I would be careful about the conditions that you would set on a timeline for something like
Well,
that.
but I'm going back to what Richard said and what
Yeah.
Ron alluded to in
Yeah.
his text to me, that
Yeah.
we don't want to just give an open end and then have a whole bunch of parcels around town that
You
are
don't.
locked into a certain use.
Right.
That's-
But
Or
remember,
locked into a developer that's not
yes, but remember,
delivering up to the standards that we have a right to expect.
But remember, they're going to go through this process, and so theoretically, what is being approved is what the town wants to see happen,
Sure.
right? So you've
Okay.
already said, "Hey, we are 100% in support of this. It takes you 5 years to do it. It's great." Right? Remember, it's not like you're approving something that you don't necessarily want to see. You're But at the same time, yes, you do not want to have these scattered about, creating issue.
How does an applicant revert back to the original conditions prior to the conditional?
They would have to rezone it. They'd have to go back and rezone it.
They can't just walk in here and say, hey, we changed our mind and go back to what it was before?
Got to come back and rezone it.
Okay.
So then they'd come back and rezone the tract, or they'd have another conditional zonings proposal on that
Okay.
tract.
You
So
can't
they'd
just say,
have to
never
go through the
mind.
whole public comments,
They'd have to
everything.
do.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Having been approved through a conditional rezoning application, are they now in a position of what has been approved is now their right? I mean, is that the point of no return?
Yeah.
Is there right? Or special use, or it
Yeah.
yes, it falls into that category.
Yeah, I mean, you could have conditional zoning that would say that we're going to conditional zone into this district, but we do have this use if it needs to be approved later at a later date would be a special use approval. But typically, that's not when you legislatively approve the uses that go there.
That's what goes there.
That's what goes there.
Okay.
Yeah. And then they need to come back and either have a subdivision plats that fall under the the rules for subdivision plat, or a major or minor site plan.
Okay. All right.
Any other comments, questions, concerns from the planning board?
I just want to clarify in terms of,
You said the last one was going to be your last one.
I did?
No, I'm
Okay,
kidding.
well,
You got
shame on me.
the microphone.
In terms of the, there were some issues in the public meetings, one of which had to do, would they be required to provide virtual access to those meetings?
Um, I don't. I mean, usually these things are face to face. So I mean, I believe that we increased the notification.
Yeah, the public comment section.
We increased the notification.
500 feet.
Yes.
Well, I'm more concerned about any meeting or public meeting. There's going to be owners that are not on site, that are going to
So,
have.
I mean,
They may not have voting rights, but they're certainly going to want to know what's going
Sure,
on.
and
being
they
able to
would be
provide them
absolutely
access
entitled to-
virtually would be.
Well, they can submit their comments.
they can submit their comments, but the public input meeting is and remember, there's also be a planning board and a town council
Okay.
following, but you can increase the mailed notice right now in the language is 10 days. You can increase that.
Is there a way to duplicate it? 30 and 10?
I mean,
What do you mean?
this is up to the
I mean,
applicant.
10 days in advance for many people is not enough advance time.
So that's what I'm saying. Do you want to
So
make
I-
that 30 days?
I would, and again, this is when I went through, when I had to do a rezoning for a home build somewhere else, I had to provide a 30-day and a 10-day. So
Yeah.
now, if I get it 30 days in advance, that gives me enough time to rearrange my schedule, and 10 days is kind of a tickler.
So remember, there's going to be multiple notifications. This is just for the public input meeting.
Right.
This is just for the public input meeting. Then they're going to be noticed again for planning board and for town council.
Yeah, but the sense that I get when I talk to residents is by the time it gets to the planning board and the town council, they haven't had an opportunity to input. So I'm all in favor of increasing the width of that public comment section. So send them a letter 30 days in advance, send them a letter 10 days. It could be the same letter, but it's
What page are you on, Wes? When you flash the pen
This
with
is
the-
under C3 on page 8.
yeah.
So it, you can make the applicant do 2 mailers. That would be fairly stringent, and that's fine. You could do it, or you
I
could
don't,
just do
I don't know
one
that I'd agree with that,
one-
but I might agree with the 30-day.
30-day.
in
And we
advance.
have that way in another beach town, precisely because of there may be out of town owners, etc. So yeah, if you want to do 30 days,
Okay.
Will you buy that?
Yeah.
Rest
I'm
of the
good.
board?
I'm good with that.
Yeah. And I mean, this is going to be circulated through newsletters and other venues. So
And again, and I reiterate what Wes said, this is just for the public input meeting. I mean,
Yes.
there's bound by general statute of what the town has to do.
Let me ask a question too of you, Chair. Well, both of you. What I don't want to see is, well, I guess it would be fine because it's their right. Let's say I'm an applicant and I want to do something somewhere within the town. I mean, I could put together a dog and pony show that would blow your socks off and probably not give you and serve wine and beer and not give people really an opportunity to do anything but absorb what I'm trying to sell. And I know I'm being harsh when I say that, and I can be criticized. I'm sure I'll be criticized for that. But when we have a public input meeting, I like the town to have at least another meeting, the town's own public input meeting, where we can, if it's a big enough deal, that we can get that input on a very neutral basis.
So I think that your point is well noted. I'll just give you sort of so in my experience, these things are rough for the developer. That there is no that they dog and pony as much as they want, but really what's happening is the developer is there and the pitchforks are there. And that's how it goes down, and the town is out of it. And that's the first intro into how this goes. And so in some of our local governments, they purposely do not even attend because they don't want to get into the middle of it. And then it gets here, and that's where it's your opportunity to have the public forum, to have talk
Comments,
yeah,
input,
yeah. Is that,
My concern is that by the time it gets to us, it's begun to kind of congeal. There isn't a lot of opportunity for public comments to really impact what's going to happen.
I don't know about that. We've had some pretty
We've had some
spirited-
pretty. We've had some pretty good. Yeah, you're right.
You're also now, I mean, but you got to look at it. This is a legislative decision. You could outright approve or deny this or approve it with conditions.
Yeah.
By right, so it meets the conditions. It don't matter what the public says. You got to approve it if it meets the baseline.
And don't
of
we,
what-
as a public hearing is not mandatory anymore. We've changed that.
except for
for
rezoning.
rezoning.
Okay.
So you would have a public
Okay.
hearing. For
So
this.
this one is going to
Yeah,
require
Richard,
a public
What?
hearing.
we have a public
So
hearing.
this
Yeah.
is going to require a public hearing not only at the planning board but also council. I have to
and
notify
the public input meeting.
and the public input meeting. I have to notify 10 to 25 days out for both, and I have to post signage for both meetings.
Okay.
So,
That's I'm satisfied.
Yeah.
Because I think that's
And
sufficient.
and then advertise in the paper for both.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I love the ad in the paper now that has Sunset Beach doing some Brunswick County work down
Yes,
here
yes.
at the Dead Man's Curve. There's a public hearing for Brunswick County coming up, and it's got the Sunset Beach logo on it and the beacon yesterday. I looked at it, and I read it 3 times saying it's coming before the planning board, but it was the Brunswick County Planning Board. It has the Sunset Beach logo on the ad, in the posting.
Oopsies.
Oh, I missed that.
It's
All right,
okay.
All right.
any other comments
Yeah.
before we deliberate? Or we decide?
Being part of this process in other parts of the country, I think as stated, it's a win-win for everybody. It's a good balance for the owner, the landowner, the people, and the town itself. So I fully recommend the board to pass this.
Yeah, I mean, this to me, I mean, I've been pounding the table about mixed-use development for a long time, and I think this really opens the door to an array of mixed-use development opportunities. I mean, Market Square in Fibber McGee's has been very successful. Brand new store just opened up there. Beautiful comic book store that's very cool. Go check it out. And I think this gives the opportunity for this kind of development in a very measured way that balances the community's need to have its desires met and the developer's entrepreneurial energy to try and improve the town with whatever they want to build. So I think it's
Thank you, Richard. Sybil, any comments? Are we
No,
ready to?
I think all my questions have been answered, and
Mine too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Chad, order of official transfer here. I believe it's my duty to read the planning board summary right now. Or do we vote on the motion first and then read the planning board summary action?
You'll vote on this and then go to the planning board summary, which is the consistency statement for the land use plan.
Consistency statement, right? I'd like to entertain a motion that we approve the conditional zoning procedure that we again have discussed as a part of our new UDO, but we'd be implementing it immediately after town council's review to be able to take advantage of the opportunity here.
And this includes the changes that we've
Thank you.
suggested to item B2.
Well, it would be page 4 where we're changing 13 to 14. It'd be page 5 where we're changing 14 to 15. It would be
Page 6 where
we're adding the may and but not limited to.
Right.
And also striking the last 2 sentences from Bravo 2, which had the 25-acre continuous track.
And the 30 days.
And the
then
30 days on page 8. Thank you, Richard. That was important.
yes,
Do we have such a motion?
I so move.
Do we have a second?
I do second this.
Do we have any further discussion? Seeing none, we'd have a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous? I think this is a good opportunity to deal with some of the existing issues that are before the town right now, situations and applications.
This,
I now need to
Mr.
read.
Chairman.
And you can, make a motion to adopt action A.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to adopt on the planning board summary, action A, and I'll read that. The planning board hereby recommends approval of the proposed amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance and finds that is generally consistent with the town's comprehensive plan.
As amended. Oh,
Comprehensive
ahead.
plan. The 2017 land use plan does not specifically contemplate conditional zoning as a potential tool to be utilized for future development requests. However, the land use plan does have many specific policies, goals, and future land use descriptions that would be utilized to evaluate future conditional zoning requests. Because of this, the town believes that the implementation of conditional zoning would be consistent with goals and policies of the 2017 land use plan due to the ability to implement said policies through on-the-ground development proposals that would incorporate the policies of the land use plan as conditions of these approval.
Okay.
That is the action. We need a motion to accept that action. Is that the proper procedure?
I so move.
Do we have a second?
I second.
Any further discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous? Okay, finishing up new business. We now have number 6 on our agenda, which is public comments. 3 minutes per speaker, no deliberation with the board members. Seeing we do have folks in our gallery, anyone want to make a public comment? Seeing no motion forward, I would like to entertain a motion from the planning board that we adjourn the meeting. And before we vote on that, our next meeting is Thursday, December 15th, which is a UDO special meeting where we'll be talking about more things like this.
And I will not be able to attend that meeting.
Okay, thank you for informing us of that. The next regular planning board meeting will be on January 5th on a Thursday here in council chambers. All right, all in favor of adjourning the meeting?
Aye.
Meeting so adjourned. You're a stickler.